The Genuine Article. Discussion and commentary based on articles from JACC.
Hello, I'm Tony DeMaria, the editor of JACC, and I'm talking with Dr. Virend Somers. And Virend is a professor of medicine and a consultant cardiologist at Mayo Clinic, and he's the senior author on a fascinating paper we're about to publish in JACC that deals with the question of whether or not modest gains in weight can affect endothelial function and perhaps predispose to coronary disease. Tell us a little bit about your study, Virend.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Tony. What we did was looked at healthy young volunteers and had them overeat for a period of about 2 months. And what happened was people put on fat in different ways. Some got fat viscerally, in other words, the fat was deposited in the abdomen, and others subcutaneously. And what we found was that the people who put on fat in the visceral region were much more likely to develop changes in endothelial function. In other words, if you got fat and it was inside the belly, your vascular function actually deteriorated to the extent that we would see in people who smoke or people with diabetes or high blood pressure.
Now, as I recall, the gain in weight was relatively modest, about 4 kilograms. How did you succeed in getting the patients to gain that weight?
We had them take in an extra 1,000 calories a day beyond what would be needed to maintain their weight. This was done by giving them additional food in the form of milkshakes and high carbohydrate food. So, when you look at the magnitude of weight gain, Tony, it is very similar to the kind of weight gain that people would experience maybe over the holidays.
Now, were you able to relate the changes in endothelial function to changes in adipokines or cytokines or any other compounds?
No, we took a broad range of measurements. And although many of them increased with weight gain as would be expected, for example, leptin and other adipokines, none of them actually seemed to increase in proportion to the change in endothelial function. So the only variable, the only fat-related variable that we measured that we could link to the degree of deterioration of endothelial function was, in fact, the magnitude of fat that was deposited viscerally.
So I guess the key question, Virend, is we're looking at a surrogate endpoint here, endothelial dysfunction, brachial reactivity. What do you think the consequences of this would be in terms of some hard endpoint like a cardiac event? It's
hard to know for sure, Tony. My guess is that if this kind of fat gain is allowed to persist or even get worse over time, the endothelial function would become, or the endothelial dysfunction become established, possibly leading in the longer term to high blood pressure and increased risk for a vascular event. But that, as you allude to, is purely conjecture at this time. All we have is a surrogate, namely endothelial dysfunction, which admittedly has been linked to an increased cardiovascular risk in long-term follow-up studies.
Well, these are really fascinating data. I think they'll attract a lot of attention. It's obvious that even relatively modest weight gain, especially if it involves visceral adiposity, can be very significant in terms of a cardiovascular risk factor, that being endothelial dysfunction. Thanks very much for sharing this data with us, Virend. For Inside JACC, I'm Tony DeMaria.